If you want to support access to study scores, deep dives into the greatest composers of all time, and music education in general online, please consider donating to my Patreon. $1 a month will get you access to all the scores in the Stravinsky series thus far. Alright, hello everyone, welcome back. We are here at last in the final video of the How to Compose Like Stravinsky series. I know we've had some laughs, we've had some tears along the way. So with that being said, let's get into this third and final video on how to compose like Igor Stravinsky. And we're going to be taking a look at Stravinsky's epic spoken word television opera, The Flood. So guys, for the third and final video we're going to be doing here, we're going to be taking a look at the third and final period of Stravinsky's life as a composer. And that third period was his introduction to and experiments with serialism, and not just serialism specifically, but dodecaphonic or 12-tone row composition. And that's just important to mention, guys, if you're not familiar. Serialism and 12-tone composition are not necessarily the same thing. Dodecaphonic composition is, of course, a part of serialism, but serialism encompasses a ton of different styles of writing with sort of note cells of varying length and repetition. The thing with 12-tone composition, if you're not familiar, and again, I encourage you guys familiarize yourself before watching this video because it might get a little heady, but just to mention quickly, 12-tone composition, notes in the row are not repeated. In the row, not the actual composition. Again, that's a misnomer a bit. People think when you're composing in that style, each note of the row has to sound before you repeat the row. Not true, but the row itself cannot repeat it. It cannot contain any repeated notes. Whereas a serial composition on its own can contain repeated notes. In fact, some of Stravinsky's early serialism, before he got into his hardcore 12-tone phase, had some repeating notes within his cells. That being said, Stravinsky does end up taking his compositions in a strict 12-tone direction towards the end of his life with some caveats. And I just want to mention a bit of the history here quickly. I won't take as long as I did in the neoclassical video. Until the later part of his life, Stravinsky didn't think very highly of Schoenberg. In fact, the two of them were often diametrically opposed in their philosophies of music when they were alive at the same time. Schoenberg saw Stravinsky as sort of, no pun intended, retrograde and not really advancing music in the way he thought it should be, whereas Stravinsky thought of Schoenberg as just somewhat nonsensical and perhaps a bit too heady for his own good. That being said, Schoenberg passed away before Stravinsky, and once he passed, for whatever reason, and I'm sure Stravinsky biographers have the answer, Stravinsky suddenly shifted from his neoclassical phase to a heavy focus on serialism, albeit in his own unique way that was still very different from Schoenberg. He had maintained his melodic sense, as we'll see when we dive into The Flood. Stravinsky started adding, slowly after Schoenberg's death, some serialist elements into compositions like Agon, into the Canticum Sacrum, and into a few other pieces, but it wasn't until his very late in life that his compositions became wholly 12-tone dodecaphonic in nature, not just encompassing a row in a section of a piece, but the entire piece theoretically became gravitationally centered around use of rows as the primary harmonic structuring element. And that's why I wanted to go over The Flood, because while we can find evidence of tone rows in, like I said, Agon, it's really pieces like The Flood or the Threnny, or the variations for Aldous Huxley later in Stravinsky's life, when the whole piece begins to revolve around 12-tone rows. So without further ado, guys, let's get into analyzing The Flood and seeing how Stravinsky treats tone rows. All right, guys, so here we are in The Flood. Now, I just want to mention that as we look at this piece, if you've never analyzed dodecaphonic music or 12-tone music, to put it simply, the analysis looks entirely different than analysis for basically any other kind of music. I mean, even when we were looking at Stravinsky's neoclassical, I said it a couple times in that previous video, which you should definitely check out if you haven't watched yet, that there was a few moments where it was almost impossible to really give a Roman numeral name to some of the harmonic choices Stravinsky was making. But overall, we could sort of pick out quite a lot of it in standard harmonic language with some implied Roman numerals in many long sections. And of course, we could pick out, an A section, a B section, and whatnot. This is very different in a 12-tone composition. And I just want to show you guys, if you're not familiar, just bear with me. So here we have Stravinsky's Row. Now, again, I would highly recommend you, when you're watching this video, that you're familiar with 12-tone theory, because I don't want to get into the weeds of completely understanding it just in this video, but just as you can see, here we have Stravinsky's rows. So I'll just do a brief overview real quick. We have the prime form at the top going horizontally, starting with C sharp, B, C, F sharp, E flat, F, and on. That's Stravinsky's 12-tone row, the prime form. And this is related to how you construct rows. And then, of course, going vertically there, we have the inversion. And then now we have the transpositions, guys. So I'll try to make this simple, but when you construct your row, right? And then let's say you raise it by a half step, right? That would be transposition 1, which we have here in the third row, because C sharp raised by a half step is D. So the row starting on D, this row that we've constructed starting on D counts as transposed row 1 up a half step, right? If we go a whole step, and again, also, quick thing, enharmonic equivalents in 12-tone composition, you have to consider them, right? So A sharp, B flat, same value, right? Because we're going to see E flat here or D sharp, same value. That's why the second horizontal row below, starting on E flat, C sharp, D, A flat, da 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 da, that would be transposition 2 by a whole step, right? Even though enharmonically that's incorrect when we think in standard theory, in 12-tone theory, enharmonic equivalents are obliterated. They're the same thing. Anyway, so there we have. So that's how you transpose rows. And then we have the inversions of rows here going vertically. And then I just want to mention retrograde. Again, this is something you guys should study on your own if you're not familiar. But retrograding the rows would be going backward horizontally from the rows, and the retrograde inversions would be going from bottom to top, right? And Stravinsky uses a specific thing called, instead of retrograde inversion, he likes to use the inverted retrograde. Again, this is very heady stuff, but just know that anything we see from the flood going forward can be found in this tone row matrix, okay? With me? If you've never studied 12-tone composition, this is odd, I know, but hang in there with me, because Stravinsky creates some incredible music with this. All right, so the first appearance, so the piece starts, we have these tremolo figures in the strings. We have the harp, the piano, the trombones and trumpets, and flute making these sort of jagged, gesticulating figures. And then right here where my mouse is, guys, we have the first appearance of use of rows in this piece, in the piece of the flood, which again is a TV opera that's like a biblical retelling of Noah's Ark. So a few things to note about the first appearance of the rows. So first, in the harp, we have the retrograde 5, right? So, and again, and it's spelled from top to bottom. So right here, guys, we have C sharp, we have C sharp, we have C sharp, we have C, we have D natural. Watch this, guys. If I go over here, so here's transposed row 5 right at the bottom. Let's go back over here where my cursor is circling to this corner, bottom corner here. C sharp, C, D natural, E flat, G. I bet you. C sharp, C, D natural, D sharp, E flat, right? G. So there's the first use of just a row laid out like that. Now I want to talk a little bit about how this row in the harp is playing against the row that's playing out orchestrally across the woodwinds. And again, it's Stravinsky is very different than Schoenberg, right? Because Schoenberg is Austrian, very, how, well, if you've studied classical music, the Austrians have a certain way of writing and it sort of bleeds into their playing. But this figure here, almost like a Tchaikovsky a Tchaikovsky-esque passage spread across the woodwinds, except this is 12-tone Stravinsky, so it's incredibly dissonant sounding. So there's a few things I just want to say here. So we have the retrograde of 5 happening in the harp. Then we have across the woodwinds, as I was just mentioning in that Tchaikovsky-esque figure, we have transposed row 5 of the prime form, right? Prime form 5, however you want to call it. And I just want to note a few things. So as we'll see going forward, and this gets more intense the more Stravinsky is trying to portray the biblical chaos of the flood, a couple of notes here are out of order, and a few are repeated. So right up until here with this A sharp, right, which would be a B flat. Again, I know when you're reading, it can get, you're like, am I missing something? But no. So we get to the B flat in this row here. So here we go. We're going prime row 5, A flat, B flat, right? And let's just double check that we're right on this. B, G sharp, so A flat, and then A sharp, B flat, right? And notice here, I've pointed this out here. We double back and repeat A flat and B flat, right? So we get to this point in the row, A flat, B flat, and Stravinsky starts to ping pong back between two notes before ultimately continuing right up here to this flute with another A sharp. So again, we make it through the row to this point and then a bit of a ping ponging effect, and then we continue on. This will be an element Stravinsky uses throughout the flood to create chaos, is to stop rows in the middle and bounce back and forth between them. Again, this is not like something that no 12-tone composer ever did before. It's not like Stravinsky was the first to do this, but because of his background as a tonalist, right, he uses it in a way that almost as if it was a tonal device, right? I mean, it isn't, but I'm thinking about sort of using half steps in those, like an old Mozart symphony, the do 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 do, right? If you're standing on 5 or you're trying to really hold that dominant feel, Stravinsky does like techniques like that within Dodecaphony, forgive me, to create tension, because at heart he is a Russian classicist. I mean, he's got those Russian elements like we talked about in the very first video, The Firebird. He's got that love for classicism, as we spoke about in the last video. And when he goes to tackle 12-tone composition, he retains those elements, and they come out in these interesting ways, which leads me to my next point about this passage. I have 2 more points, and then we're going to move on, I promise. So here, we almost have a bit of an imitative quality to some of this, right? Notice how as we're starting notes between, clarinet, oboe, and flutes and piccolo, we're landing on top of each other. There's even like a bit of, again, Stravinsky's love of Bach, this imitative thing. As I've played this on my own on piano, almost a bit of a 12-tone little fugato elements going on. It's very interesting, right? Stravinsky takes those classicist and Russian elements, as I mentioned, and just puts them in this context. And the last thing I want to say about this, and it's about 12-tone composition in general. A lot of times composers working in 12-tone who have a mystical bent to them or a religious bent will use the tone row matrices graphically, meaning, for example, you could create a shape with rows, like I'll do it here. I don't believe Stravinsky does it in this composition, but one sec, guys. So if I wanted to make a cross, right, because this is a Christian thing, I could have a row starting on the retrograde inversion 4 right here, fly up to E flat, then pivot going on retrograde 10, right? Then return back going just prime row transpose 10 to like A flat, then double back and go back up the retrograde inversion, right? And I would have a cross. I could make a Star of David if I wanted to. I could make a triangle. I could make any kind of shape I want. And a lot of 12-tone, well, not a lot, but some 12-tone composers will use graphical representation that you only would see if you were to go to the matrix and lay it out to represent mystical ideas or philosophical ideas, or just, I've seen compositions that if you put them in the matrix, it's a diamond. That's the kind of thing that is really just a super cool thing. And I just want to mention that because this is sort of representative here, in my mind, of Jacob's Ladder, which is a biblical story. And because if you lay these rows out, they sort of look like Jacob's Ladder. And again, this specific thing with retrograde 5, prime row transposed 5 appears, we're not going to analyze it, but later in a couple different spots in the entire score of The Flood, it appears. And so to me, this is Stravinsky representing Jacob's Ladder, which is just super cool. And again, if you choose to compose in 12-tone ways, graphical representation in the matrix is quite just an awesome thing. We're just going to go on. And okay, so here we are, guys. We are going to start seeing rows appear, different rows all throughout this opening segment. So I've chosen to analyze. We'll be analyzing this opening segment, the Sanctus, and then we will be analyzing the choreography, the Flood choreography, which is the only purely instrumental section in the Flood. And I wanted to do that because I just wanted to analyze it's a little more clear. But nonetheless, I've chosen to label the rows here of all the characters singing because, again, this is a biblical tale. So I just find it interesting how Stravinsky uses different rows to represent God, Satan, and their intersection therein. But before we get into all that, I want to talk about Stravinsky's sectional use of rows. So for example, here in the soprano and alto singers, we have the use... Well, first we have the retrograde 10 here for the sopranos and altos, and the prime row inversion here in the tenor. Then things switch, and the soprano and altos take the inverted prime row, right? So if we go here, we take a look. We have C sharp, E flat, D, A flat, B, right? Let's take a look. C sharp, D sharp, so E flat, C sharp, D sharp. So again, this gets to my next point, is Stravinsky's use, as I mentioned earlier, the sectional use of rows. What Stravinsky does here in this opening section of The Flood is he takes a small sliver of inversion 0 and repeats it and ping-pongs it back and forth to create this sense of tension, right? Because here we have C sharp, D sharp, we're going to call E flat, C sharp, D sharp, da-da-da-da, D sharp, C sharp, da-da-da-da. We're just the first two notes of this row. And this continues till rehearsal number 45. This little tiny sequence that, again, look, if you see here, we have C sharp, D sharp, C sharp, D sharp in the main vocal lines, which are provided by soprano and alto here, until, right here I have a note about it, Stravinsky has delayed the unfolding of the row until right here at rehearsal number 45, and then the rest of the row continues to play out. And then as you can see, we have alto and tenor switching to retrograde inversion of 0. The soprano continues on the inverted row and then stops, doubles back, and goes retrograde. And there's something really interesting about that. And I've written, okay, so ROT4, rotation 4, meaning that a rotation is like, as I learned it, when you start in the middle of a row and then continue up or down in the correct direction, not at the starting tone of the row. So what's interesting to me here, and I just want to point this out, and I have these notes circled, is Stravinsky gets to E, right, the note E. So if we go here, right, so here's E, right, if we're going inversion of the prime row down, we've made it to E. Stravinsky stops here and doubles back, going retrograde inversion. So we stop at E and go to C. So let's take a look here, right? I'm going to zoom in for everybody. E, right? Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I hate computers. E, C, 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 B flat. Let's take a look here. C, and then we have a B flat right above, as we see. So again, this is an incredible technique Stravinsky uses throughout The Flood to invoke certain emotions, right? Rows will halt, ping pong, and then oftentimes reverse direction or begin to fragment and be fragments of different rows will start coming on top of each other to emphasize the chaos. And I want to make one comment about that because we may see it earlier, and if I miss it, because again, this is very dense stuff, guys, I just want to say that oftentimes Stravinsky will take a sort of hazy tonal outlook on this stuff. So meaning, if a row stops and doubles back or inverts or heads in a different direction, oftentimes the pivot will happen in such a way that the beginning of the next row is a fifth away from where he had started, where the row had started. Again, this 1-5 relation is very, it's weird to say, right, but very classical in the sense that Stravinsky leaves these little tiny, that you can't really hear, but you can if you really listen and focus, hints of classicality, of tonality, because at heart, Stravinsky is not Schoenberg or Webern or Berg, right? Or Stockhausen, for that matter, or Pierre Boulez or whatnot. Stravinsky is Stravinsky, and he's a tonal composer in his being. Obviously, like here, we're doing 12-tone stuff, so that's silly to say, but he has a strong sense of melody and drama and tonal centers. So brief tonal centers that are very traditional 1-5-1 can be implied based on where rows pivot around each other. So I just wanted to mention that. Because here, I think maybe I can even find an example here. Yeah, I can even find an example right here, guys. So I spoke too soon, because sometimes when you're analyzing this stuff, you can get lost in the weeds and miss stuff. As the alto moves to retrograde inversion 0, we stay on I-O up here. And as you can see, look right here, we have F sharp and C sharp, right? G and D sharp. Having rows harmonize or start at least implied a fifth away from each other is something that happens a lot in this piece. And it betrays in a good way Stravinsky's sort of nature of keeping things, trying to keep some center of gravity within the chaos. And trust me, it does get chaotic. So let's move on. And again, I just want to mention here, guys, right here, as we see as retrograde of the prime form starts and retrograde inversion starts, we have Stravinsky classically delaying the row, right? So if we look at the retrograde here, A flat, G, A, right? And then Stravinsky hangs A, and then we continue throughout the row. And then right here it happens again as we land on E flat, E flat, E flat, E flat, E flat, F sharp, right? And if we take a look here, E flat, E flat, E flat, F sharp. So again, another example of the technique of Stravinsky in the flood, delaying the row, slicing it up. And as you can see here, guys, from the rest of the score, those were the main things I wanted to take a look at in the opening vocal number of the flood. Is Stravinsky chopping up rows, pivoting, for example, here with a sort of pseudo-fifth relation to give you guys, using a few rotations here. We have rotation 3, rotation 4. And I've annotated this and left notes for you guys. Again, all these scores are available on my Patreon for just $1 a month. So please sign up there. That will be very much appreciated. It enables me to do all this stuff, or it will hopefully enable me to have more time to do this stuff, but I digress. So that's kind of the basic gist of the opening number. Again, basic gist in 12-tone composition is a bit of a misnomer. This is kind of stuff you need to deeply study to understand how each composer manipulates their rows. Again, Stravinsky comes from a more tonal background, so you'll see elements of that here. Someone like Schoenberg comes from late German Wagner-esque Romanticism, which was already quite chromatic to begin with, so his rows are more dense. And then some of the Russian mystic composers that descended down from Scriabin, Roslavitz, Obukov, take an even different approach in their serial work, some of which is 12-tone, some of which is not. So I've labeled the rest of the opening sequence between God, Satan, as you can see here is Lucifer, and sort of the chorus. I've labeled each row as they appeared. You guys can see from here. Let's see. We have and again, a lot of the same rows are used in this opening number. Retrograde inversion 0, retrograde inversion 0. The prime form row is used. Retrograde inversion 2. Here with prime row 7 happens. Again, there's quite a bit of rotation. Stravinsky starts on the 3rd tone in the row, moves backwards, then starts on the 6th and moves backwards to 4. These are all compositional techniques if we're trying to be influenced by this aspect of Stravinsky's composing career, the serialist he was at the end of his life. These are some of the techniques he used. Again, inversion 0, prime row, da-da-da-da. So that's kind of the basic. Again, I just want to emphasize this isn't basic, but these are some of the techniques that Stravinsky uses in the opening number of the flood, right? Sort of just his way of manipulating rows. Now, I want to dive into the next section I've annotated for everyone. Okay, so here we have the flood, as you guys can see, the flood choreography, right? So this is the only purely instrumental section of the flood, and it is incredibly dense, which is why I wanted to look at it, because as we can see, guys, this is supposed to be when the earth is flooding, right? So Stravinsky went all out with row manipulation here. I mean, if I just take a look at some of my notes here, right? So we have retrograde of the prime form here. Here we see Stravinsky using a very clear row. This time, however, characteristically notes are skipped and missing from the sequence. In fact, right, so if we zoom in again, it's hard. There's a lot of legend lines here. We have G sharp, A sharp, so G sharp, A, B flat. Now let's take a look at the row here. Now look at this. Again, this might not seem super radical, but the G is missing, right? If we take a look at the rest of the row, D, E, F, E flat. So here we have D, E, D sharp. Once again, Stravinsky we've skipped a tone, right? And the rest of the row plays out. I've circled this F here in the xylophones because is Stravinsky adding in one of the missing notes in a different voice? Quite possibly, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is, as you can see, if we look at the retrograde of the prime form row, we've skipped G, we've skipped F. Notes whole step apart. Interesting, at different points in the sequence. Same thing here. We have retrograde. We have the same row here, I want to point out, but rotation 1, starting on G, right? G, A, B flat, D. Let's see. G, A sharp, B flat, D, E, E flat, F sharp. So again, this this iteration on rotation 1 of the retrograde of the prime plays out from top to bottom. Stravinsky skips certain notes here. Is it to create harmonic implications? Is there some religious significance? Is it just because he liked the sound? All could be reasons, right? But this is part and parcel of what we're going to see as we look at the choreography. This is the first sign things are about to get very wonky, right? So first, we start off with the inversion of the prime row. Easy enough, right? Let's take a look at that row. C sharp, E flat, D, A flat, right? Let's take a look here. C sharp, D sharp, so E flat, D, right? G sharp, A flat, right? Okay, that's cool. B, sure. And then we have B, and then A, and then C, right? And so A, okay, so it's like, okay, we take a look here. B flat is missing, right? And so this is the kind of thing when you're doing deep row analysis, figuring out what rows are at play can be a lot, right? But so what I figured out here is that right after we hit this A, Stravinsky pivots us to retrograde inversion 4, and it's a rotation. Let's take a look here. C, F sharp, G, F. Row 4, here's C. Now if we're going retrograde inversion, C, F sharp, G, F. There it is. So already we see Stravinsky has stopped us mid-row in one row and inserted another row to smash together. And then we halt. This will be a recurring motif throughout the choreography. Stravinsky, after playing a few rows together, we halt on C sharp, right? Also, I just want to mention retrograde inversion of 0 is providing harmony in the tuba, which I just find interesting. Again, there's some contrapuntal elements at play here for sure. I'm not going to get into that, only to know that Stravinsky slips in a few just correct contrapuntal movements here, going contrary motion in and out of into fifths and octaves. Just observing at moments the exact rules of species counterpoint, which is utterly fascinating. I'm not going to get into that too much because we'd be here all day. We're here, right? And I'm pointing to, let me circle with my cursor. We land on this C sharp sort of motif. Continue again with the inverted row, right? Inversion 0. Then, I've labeled here, brief fragments of inversion 3. Let's take a look here. I'm going to get into this. And again, remember, this is the biblical scene when everything, the water is coming down. So this is meant to be, and I've written here, things get topsy-turvy. Stravinsky inserts 3 and 4 note cells from various rows and chains them together. Again, if we look close here, we can find relations of fifths that are seconds apart, thirds apart. It's very interesting. I just want to get into here. So we have C sharp, E flat, G sharp, so A flat. So we have to go to our row to confirm what's going on here. If we take a look here, and I've labeled this in inversion 3, right? And it's a bit of a rotation, which I didn't quite label, but I should have. So let's go here. And here, where my cursor is, here is our 4-note cell that we just identified. C sharp, E flat, G, A flat. Let's go back. Oh, let's go back. C sharp, E flat, G, A flat, right? Little bit of row 3 there. We have an interesting rotation here on retrograde inversion 5. And I'm calling it a rotation, but there's quite a bit of skipping going on here. So if we go to row 5, retrograde, right? F sharp, skip up to D, E, C sharp, right? Already getting chaotic, right? Because there is a consecutive rotation here with these three notes, but the F sharp is not in sequence there. We have to skip up a minor sixth. Interesting, right? Interesting. And then as we land on this C sharp, guys, we return to the inversion of prime row 0. Take a look. C sharp, E flat, D. Here we go again, guys. C sharp, E flat, D, A flat, B. Again, Stravinsky is inserting chunks of various rows, throwing them kind of into this as the flood is happening. And oftentimes he will then, after a little chunk is inserted, right? We have inversion 3 here, retrograde inversion 5. Here is a fragment of inversion 0. And then after these two little, again, as Stravinsky, he throws these little chunks in, we continue with inversion 0 of the prime row. And again, as you notice here where my cursor is, a few notes are out of order or missing, but enough notes happen in sequence that we can identify, in my opinion, this as that row. And again, Stravinsky is throwing these chunks at us, but nonetheless, he returns to that inversion of the prime row throughout. And again, as we land here, and a few notes are out of order here, guys, for sure. As we land here and that C sharp sort of hold motif, again, if we count from this C sharp, E flat, G, A flat, this same fragment that I've labeled here from inversion 3, right, shows up again. And let's prove it. Let's go back. So here we are in 3, C sharp, E flat, G, A flat. There's our cell, and here it is again. And we have chunks from retrograde inversion 10 here. 10, and again, this is a bit hard to read because we have E and E sharp, so you're like, why, right? But E, E sharp, D sharp, so E, F, E flat, right? E, F, here it is. Here's our cell, guys. E, F, E flat. So again, as the choreography of the biblical flood gets more intense, notice how Stravinsky is chaining cells from different rows together. But again, here, right here where I've labeled I0, he always gets us back to his prime, no pun intended, or his main row of choice here. So as we continue on, let's take a look at some of this. So again, we have a series of rows chained together here. But again, guys, take a look right here. Yes, the unfolding technique. Okay, so guys, I just took a look at, so taking a look at my notes here. This goes back to what we saw in the very beginning of the piece, right? Stravinsky now moves, after chaining a series of cells together from different rows, back to the inversion of the prime row. However, as I've noted in my notes here, Stravinsky uses what I like to call his unfolding of the row technique, which I'm sure other composers have used, but he used it here to great effect. So as I've circled here, Stravinsky allows the row to play out. Let me actually adjust this, guys, so you can see that accidental. Okay, the row plays out in order. When we get to the C natural here, right, guys, here's our cell that we've just watched. Or I'm sorry, guys, I got to adjust this. Okay, here we have, notice from C sharp to C, here is our cell that we've just seen play out, right, in the flood. We stop. We begin again, except this time, instead of going to C natural, we make it to E. So the length of our cell increases by 1 note. And as we can see here, guys, after demonstrating this unfolding here, Stravinsky puts us through a bit of a rotation. Here we start on B flat, right? B flat, C, E, F, right? Let's take a look at this cell. B flat, C, E, F. Now, what's interesting here is that once we hit this F, Stravinsky restarts the row again, and then we get to this section, we get up to the A natural, which we saw earlier here. Again, the roll is unfolding, stopping, rotating, unfolding, right? And then we get to this C sharp here, and the row at last unfolds fully from C sharp to F sharp. So let's see. Here we have C sharp, here we have F sharp. Just trust me, guys, the notes here are all in the row. And we go C sharp, E flat, D, A flat, B, A, B flat, C, E, F, G, F sharp, right? And we can even see G is the second to last note, F sharp. So again, a great technique if we're trying to be influenced by Stravinsky here in this serial period of his composing career. Expansion, contraction, unfolding, doubling back, rotating. These are the type of things we see happening in the flood choreography, and we saw earlier a bit in the intro, and I just wanted to highlight that here. Here we have, despite, as I showed earlier, how Stravinsky stitched a ton of rows together, here we just have the retrograde inversion of the prime row here. So here we go, start with A, B. Let's take a look here, guys. And this is a bit of a rotation, guys, because as we can see here, we're doing A, B, G sharp, D. Let's take a look here. A, B, A flat, so A flat, D, right? So again, these are sections within the row, and I've actually labeled rotation here, so I will do that here so you guys know if you choose to subscribe to my Patreon and get this score, so I'm not confusing anyone. We have a rotation here of the retrograde inversion of the prime row, and that's just pretty standard. We have some of the rotationary techniques happening here. Yeah, so we just have a lot of rotationary effects of the retrograde of the inversion. Let's see what happens. And again, as we see here, guys, retrograde inversion rotations being chained together. Stravinsky continues to chain smaller cells of various rows together to increase the chaos. And so here we go, guys. And again, look, here we have the inversion of the prime row coming back. Again, I've put asterisks here because things start to get very, very, very chaotic here. Here we have retrograde inversion 2, rotation 4, chained to the inversion of the prime row, and we can see that here. Again, this is the inversion of the prime row, but as I've circled here, there's a lot of skipping going on. So C sharp, A flat, C sharp, A, B flat. So C sharp, A, B flat. So we're still moving down in the correct direction. A natural. A, B, C sharp, A, B flat. Right, so we've moved from C sharp to A and B flat. We're ping-ponging back and forth between this part of the row. Then we move to B. So then we're moving backwards a bit. So it's a bit of a retrograde inversion, to be honest with you. Then we have G sharp. So again, I put this as inversion 0, but the truth is once we get around here, we're moving backwards up the row, and it's a bit of a retrograde inversion, but this stuff gets murky because again, we're getting into that crazy part of Stravinsky's technique of ping-ponging around different rows and slicing up cells to increase the chaos of the flood choreography. And so that's actually, guys, basically that's the end of my analysis of this, and then we end with the 2 rows we started with in harmony on top of each other. And then we move to the Covenant of the Rainbow, which I have not analyzed. So again, guys, what we can take here with Stravinsky, a lot of chopping up of rows, slicing cells together, looking for vague tonal relations like a fifth apart or a third apart. These are all the elements of Stravinsky's writing. And a couple times things are more standard, but as we can see here, also the unfolding, taking a row, rolling it out, returning to the beginning, rolling it out one step further, rotating it a bit, then rolling the full thing out. Again, this is sort of compositional techniques that Stravinsky used in a very interesting way to increase the drama of his pieces. And again, because it's Stravinsky, even though this is a 12-tone composition, things become quite melodic. And again, that's because Stravinsky, there's implications of a lot of tonal type ideas in here if we look closely, like between fifths and thirds and whatnot. And that's, again, very different from Schoenberg, right? Who was not at all concerned with that. Stravinsky, when he finally approached 12-tone composition here in The Flood, things were really interesting. And I encourage you to listen to this piece. It was composed it was premiered in 1962. So the same year the Beatles came out. I actually believe the Beatles were touring America right around the time Stravinsky was debuting The Flood at CBS Studios. They might have even like crossed paths, which is weird. But anyways, so this is just a little bit of a taste of Stravinsky's pure 12-tone technique. Now again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Stravinsky used elements of serialism much earlier than this for just a few sections of pieces, like in Agon. I mentioned there's a couple tone rows in there, but I wanted to showcase The Flood because Stravinsky went all out with this, and I really feel it's very much him. I mean, again, even if we look at the nature of the row itself, you know, there's a lot of interesting relations here, right? I mean, we have a fourth in the fourth cell, right? Again, and if we look at all this, right, you know, C sharp, F sharp, C sharp, A flat, again, it's all, if we look at the corners of this matrix, right, we can see that there's these little hints of tonality in there. that if I was like Schoenberg or something, I wouldn't really give a shit about. I mean, I don't have any of his matrices on hand at the moment, but I don't think you'll find that many matrices where there are these strong tonal implications just within a row itself, let alone, as I pointed out, that one section where we have C sharp and F sharp, or sorry, F sharp and C sharp on top of each other, rows starting a fifth apart. Like, for example, again, even here, we have this tuba sort of as accompaniment, right? We got F sharp, we got C sharp, right? We got that perfect fifth. Everything starts in a perfect fifth. And again, there are these tonal implications throughout the flood, and that's just something that's amazing about Stravinsky. So anyways, guys, this concludes the three-part trilogy, so to speak, of how to compose like Stravinsky. I hope you guys learned something. I had a lot of fun sort of really relearning this stuff and diving in deep so I could explain it. And I feel like I have learned a lot, to be honest with you, going forward if I'm interested in composing in any of these styles. And I feel like my knowledge of how Stravinsky composed has greatly expanded. And so that's what I hope to do with this series is I'll choose a ton of composers for your benefit and mine, frankly, because I'm learning stuff as I'm doing this. So please remember to subscribe, leave a like, please head on over to my Patreon. All these scores and the previous scores from the whole series of the Stravinsky, all the scores of the Stravinsky series will be available there. And I just want to thank you guys so much. I will see you in the next video. Maybe I'll put up a poll to see which composer we should do next. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Have fun out there. Keep composing. Love music. I will see you all later.